Hey, it's Keisha here with Defending the Early Years podcast. We'll be focusing on amplifying the voices of early childhood educators, advocates, and all of those who love children.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. I am fangirling here with Teacher Tom. Teacher Tom is, this guy puts out the most deep, heartwarming piece of writing daily. I don't know where he gets it from, but I'm going to guess a lot of the inspiration for this work comes directly from the children. Tom is a longtime contributor to the Play Work Warrior War that we're all a part of. Hey, Tom, welcome.
Hi, Keisha. Hey, yeah, I'm fanboying. You're one of my heroes out there. So this is just a mutual admiration society.
Oh, I'm just so lucky to be here with you today, chatting with you and sharing what you've learned from the children and all these years of working alongside children. And then there's this other aspect of it directly with parents. And I was so inspired by that aspect of your work that I even started a parent participation program. So I want everyone to hear your thoughts. We've talked a lot in the past about the ways that early childhood can be saved, right? Right now, it's failing. And I want to talk about that today. But before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, who you are, and what you're doing these days?
I recently have read Kurt Vonnegut's sort of his book. I can't remember the name of it, but it's sort of like the best thing he came to, like an autobiography or memoirs or something. And in there, he says, we're here on this earth to fart around. And I think that that's how I ended up in early childhood. And I think that's the best way to end up in early childhood. Because I didn't plan on doing this. This was not part of me. I was going to be like an advertising executive. That was kind of my original plan coming out of college. And then I was going to be a writer, and I was a freelance writer for a while. But it wasn't until our daughter was born in 1996 that I became the stay-at-home parent. And I love that stay-at-home aspect of it, right? It was just, to me, that sounded really good as a dyed-in-the-wool introvert. I love the idea of staying at home and just cozying with my little girl and making some snacks and, playing some toys and that kind of stuff, and going for walks and hiking in the woods and all those kind of things. And but she started telling me, like, the time she could start talking, she started saying, "Hey, Papa, today let's do something." Let's go somewhere. She didn't like the stay-at-home part. She wanted, the way kids are, right? They want to go out and they're curious about the world and be able to do it with a parent, right? Is the natural sort of way to be able to do it, is to get out there with a loved one. It doesn't have to be a parent, any caretaker who loves the child and they trust. And so that's kind of how I got into it. My daughter made me go out into the world and start interacting with other people who had children and with young children.
Mm-hmm. And I find that so authentic of a way to end up here, because when you went into it because that's what your daughter needed and wanted.
Yep.
But when your daughter grew up, she's now an adult and you're still here. What does that say? This has somehow become a part of you. It sparked from that child, but it's become a part of you. And that's a story that I hear from a lot of early childhood educators. I just find that it's very telling.
Well, I think, Keisha, it's part of the curse and the blessing of our profession. Honestly, having it be a calling, because I think almost when I talk to you, it's very clear that this is your calling. When I talk to almost anybody in our profession, the people I look up to and admire and respect, every one of them is, doing it because it's calling. The sad part about it is, and I think the negative part is, that there are people out there in the world, especially people who hold the purse strings, who say, well, you do it for free anyway, so why should we pay you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it because you love it, so is it really work? That kind of thing. And so so I think we really have this, because I think apprenticeship and treating it as a calling is the right way to go into this profession. But the truth is that if we don't start insisting on our professionalism, insisting on the importance of the work we do, and insisting on our own expertise as being people who spend every day with groups of children, with thousands of children over the course of our careers, getting to know individual children, but also children kind of as a category, as a group. Right now, people don't seem to really respect that. And so that's, I think, really why we're in a crisis state in our profession, or at least part of it.
I 100% agree with you. And it's like with anything else, when there is a systemic message that's been ingrained in you, it affects everyone, not just society. It also affects the actual early childhood educators. So then we have a group of people who begin to believe that maybe we're not professionals, if we're not in the public school, or maybe we're not worth more money because we work with young children.
Right.
So it's this major rewrite of our value, our position, our understanding of young children. And we need a seat at the table, not just a seat at the table. We should be at the head of the table of any discussion regarding young children. If we're going to do things that I think are wonderful and could save early childhood, like let parents not go broke paying for it, make it accessible to all. But we can't do that at the detriment to developmentally appropriate practice. We can't do that in lieu of creating loving home-like environments. If these environments are going to be watered down schools, that's not solving the problem. That's actually, solving one problem and making another problem much worse. You're going to put your eggs in one basket and the other basket's empty. It's got a hole in it,
No, I completely, as you know, we agree with each other on these matters. Mainly, I think, because both of us have spent most of our careers working not just with children, but with families.
Yes.
And to me, I think that I keep coming back, circling back to that as maybe the beginnings of, I'm going to use the word revolution. We need to be, maybe it's already started, or that revolution we need to coalesce around this idea, because the truth is that we are natural allies, right? Parents and early childhood educators are natural allies. It doesn't always show up that way, right? I mean, when I go around and I talk to, I go to other schools, a lot of what I do in these days is I travel to other schools and I do observations, I do professional development with teachers and things like that. And I'll talk to them about self-directed learning, the importance of play, the importance of connection, the importance of, as my friend Keisha talks about, an authentic childhood. And and my friend John Unitas talks about having life-derived learning rather than like the school-derived learning, but learning that comes out of life itself, which goes back to John Dewey and all the originators of our modern schooling. And when I think about that, I always realize that it's the natural. We are. Okay, I'm going to put my words together properly here. The parents and teachers and children, if we can stand united with one another, there's no force on earth that can stop us from doing what we know is right.
Exactly. Yep. I think some of the challenge is that we have not yet agreed on what is right.
Yep.
So there's this, I mean, as a profession, like research wise, we know what's right.
Right.
Development wise, human development wise, we know what's right. But I think for so long, parents have been a part of this, systemic message, and they too have it's a conflict, because on one hand, they know their child, they spend time with their child, they understand their child. And then on the other hand, they have this big entity telling them that in order for their child to fit into the society, they have to now do these things.
Right.
And it's really important that we as early educators play that role where we say, no, that's not what's right for children. And I agree with you 100% that nothing's going to change if we cannot, one, build those relationships, communicate that to parents, and then become allies and work together to do what's right for kids.
To create an authentic childhood. I mean, to me, it's a lot about telling stories with each other. And you and I, when we talk, very often we find ourselves talking about our own childhoods. And when you do that, you start connecting, other people start connecting to their own childhoods. And,
Yes.
almost never, I mean, when you ask people to think about their most beautiful moments, they almost always talk about being outside. They almost always talk about being unsupervised. They almost always talk about playing with other kids. They almost never mention toys as part of it. And they almost never mention school as part of it. And they usually are talking about a time when they're taking a risk or doing something a little naughty or something that that their parents never found out about till this day. And these are the kinds of things that that create the bedrock of what I think an authentic childhood is, because it puts us out there in the real world where we can make decisions in the real world, where the things we say and think actually make a difference. People all the time talk about, parents, for example. One of the things that we find, at least I've always found, is that there's a certain category of parents who are deeply concerned about their children being injured physically or emotionally and socially. And I'm here to assure every parent that will happen.
Yes.
That's why we worry about it, because we've all had that experience. Even the most popular kids get rejected like 30 to 50% of the time in the classroom when they try to enter into play. So we know what that feels like. We know what it feels like to scrape a knee or to bump our heads and things like that. But what we know from the research is there's no other way to learn some of these things than to have those accidents, to have those falls, to have those setbacks, and then to have a community around you that can support you in recovering from them and coming back. To me, I think one of the greatest mistakes we've made in a modern society is, today what we do, most people, and I'm not talking about your school or my school, I'm talking about kind of the general population out there, is, people get up in the morning and they send their kids off to this place called school, and, preschool in our case. And then then the adults go to this place called work. And so it's totally segregated places, and the kids aren't really welcome at work, and the parents are often not welcome in the schools. And then we've even done this thing where we all live, not all of us, but a lot of us live thousands of miles away from the grandparents and the aunts and uncles. We've scattered ourselves around. So we've got
the village is gone.
The village is gone. Exactly. That's exactly where I was going with this, is that what we've lost is, so when I talk to parents now, and they come to me and, say they're 28 years old and they're 30 years old and they've got their 2-year-old coming in, most of them have not been around young children since they themselves were young children, because they haven't been in a community where, the natural order of things is that, the 12-year-olds help take care of the kids, the 8-year-olds take care of the 2-year-olds. There's this whole progression where there are children's part of everybody's life, and the grandparents are essential parts of that. The village, the whole community, is part of that. It's it used to be that kids grew up with hundreds of caretakers from around their community. And and for a lot of reasons, probably the invention of the car, the invention of airplanes, all that kind of stuff allowed us to separate ourselves around the world. But now we've kind of created this idea where the family unit is the key unit, and it's not enough.
Yeah.
We need to create our community. So to me, that's when I look at my school. I always thought of my school as that neighborhood that I grew up in.
And that's what inspired my work with, down the line, it didn't always look like that for me, but as I started to really question things, that was my model. Like, how can I create the most authentic, I guess, replica of what a real, true, wild childhood would look like within our current society, right?
Right.
And that's what I was going to ask you when you were talking earlier. So what's the remedy? Like, we do have parents that have to go to work, and we have children that have to go to programs and schools, and lots of elementary schools having preschools in them, or lots of large organizations with multiple programs and, hundreds and hundreds of children, and, very underpaid, overworked staff.
Right.
How do we reverse this? Like, what, after we make those connections with parents, then what? What are our next steps? I know you are a creative man. And you have some serious ideas about this.
I think about this all the time, and there's an issue with everything, right? What we really need is, you mentioned the word systemic. We need a systemic change in the way we think of children, the way we kind of organize. when I start really thinking about it, we've got to kind of dismantle part of the economy, and there's a lot of stuff we could do. And that's probably,
I know, it's like everything has to rip it all out and plant a new seed.
it's all connected. But for me, I
Mhm.
think, on our day-to-day basis, I mean, for me, the thing that I want to do is I want to live the example of a connected community of people who are centered around caring for children. Alison Gopnik, in her book, The Gardener and the Carpenter, she has this great line, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it's close to this. It's something like, the central project of every civilization is to care for the children. And you can, and that is the central project. I mean, if you look at evolution, you look at just the purpose, that next generation is the reason we exist, right? At least if you believe in evolution and you follow the theories. So then you look at what our society does, the way we care for children. And right now we treat them like incomplete human beings, as kind of little idiots that need somebody hovering over them all the time, or else they'll cut their fingers off, or they'll bump their heads, or they'll run off a cliff or something like that, which doesn't happen, right? The sense of self-preservation is pretty high, but so we feel like there has to be these adults, and then we feel like the adults even have to go so far as to tell them what to think, how to think, when to think it, when to go to the bathroom, ask permission, they stand in lines, do all this kind of stuff, because they're so out of control.
Yeah, and we don't trust them. It's like they're born bad, and if we don't punish it out of them, or discipline it out of them, horrible adults. It's like this deficit mindset that we have about children as a society. Obviously, not every person, but as a society, our mindset about children is at a deficit. I was reading. I don't know why I do this, but I was watching something on TikTok. Someone just not treating a child properly, and the comments are what always gets me, and I have to just make a decision. Am I going to go into this rabbit hole and like get in here and start replying, or am I going to save myself? Because
What did you decide?
sometimes I decide to get in there, and then sometimes I decide I can't do it today. Sometimes I'm like, mental health, I cannot do it today, because I get enraged, because there's always some gems in there that are saying great things, but there will be the large majority every single time are grown-ups who are saying that as humans, we're born bad, right? We are born bad and despicable. And if we do not punish them, if we do not spank them, if we do not, make them feel our wrath and fear us, they will be bad. And what's the most frustrating about it is when you change out child and you put wife, or you put any adult, really, it's blasphemy. I did this experiment once. I decided to repeat everything the person said, but with wife instead of child.
Right.
And you would have thought, and it was like a gang of people saying, "Oh, so you're saying that, spousal abuse, and it's not funny to talk about domestic violence." And I just paused and I replied back, read that again with child in place, and tell me why it's okay now. I just think when they're saying it, because we devalue children so much, they don't even realize how horrible it sounds, how horrible it is.
Right. And I think the hard part is, of course, social media is the worst place, I think, to do this kind of thing. I used to think it was really important to do it, but you don't persuade people by arguing on the internet. I mean, I don't believe that. I think that's why my blog, I mean, when I write on my blog, you say, thanks for mentioning it. I write something, I post 5 days a week. And what my hope is, I mean, sometimes I'm really, firm, and this is what I believe and this is what I think, but most of the time I'm just trying to create a scenario where people can think, right? Just to give some area for, like, I just wrote a post this last week where, I was questioning, why are we teaching Roman numerals and cursive in school? Right. And of course, people are giving me these incredible responses about it, right? Because some people are like, no, cursive is absolutely essential, or Roman numerals, how do you know what Super Bowl it is? I mean, just, but it's, I think it's good to just have these discussions, and, and then I go through on the comments and things, and I like every one of them. I read every one of them and I like it, because I like that they're thinking about it, right? That they're using their cognitive skills, which is what I hope we're doing as educators with young children too. We're not telling them what to think. We're creating an environment which encourages thinking.
Wonderful.
And so to me, that's what I try to do. So for me, if I'm trying to, the blog is what I've been writing it since 2009. So it's more than a decade of me trying on a day-to-day basis to sort of shift people's thinking about, about young children, or at least to think new thoughts. You were talking about that example there. One time I wrote a blog post where I just posed the idea. I said, I don't believe this, but why don't we let children vote?
Mm-hmm.
And the arguments against children voting, you could word for word take them and say, these were the arguments used to prevent women from voting.
Women, yeah, yep.
Black people from voting, from anybody from voting. It was the same. Well, they're not cognitively there. They're not smart enough. They're too emotional. All of those things, right? They don't know enough. They don't understand the world enough. And it's sort of like, I'm not saying we should give children the right to vote, but maybe we should.
Mm-hmm. And maybe at the very least, can they have a vote in the House? Like, can they have a voice in their lives?
Well, I think that's the
really
important part, right? Because isn't that what we want in our society? We purport to be a democracy. Isn't that kind of what we want our kids to grow up to be, as critical thinkers, people who think for themselves, who make their own decisions? So when we teach them obedience, or we teach them that the adults always know best, and we teach them not to question authority or challenge authority, we're teaching them the opposite, I think, of the skills we need them to have if we're going to move our society forward.
Mm-hmm. And there's at least 18 years of that. And then we let them loose in college and say, hey, decide what you want to be for your life and get out there and spread your wings.
I know your kids aren't doing this, but a lot of kids just go to college and drink the first 2 years. Right?
And thank goodness mine aren't.
It's the first time that they've had freedom, right? It's the first time they've been allowed to make their own decisions about their lives. And so they make all the bad decisions in those first 2 years.
And that was something, even as a child, I remember noticing, like the kids that were in school with us who had the strictest parents, who could never go to any of the parties, who were always like in trouble or doing chores or whatever. Those were the sneakiest, the most, the wildest when not in the sight of their parents.
Yeah.
And the wildest in college children ever. And I remember noticing that. And I mean, I hope that plays a part in the way that I raised my children. Because for sure, and the same thing in the classroom, children who feel fear are never going to tell you, Miss Keisha, I'm sorry, but I broke the aquarium and it's leaking. They're going to let it leak and they're going to hide because they are scared.
Yeah.
They are an environment where children are fearful of making a mistake or of making a decision or of asking a question is no learning environment. They can't learn that way.
Well, they're not going to, it's certainly going to be a very difficult place to learn in. I mean, you're going to learn something, but what you're going to learn is to hide your mistakes.
Exactly.
And to don't do anything unless you can. I mean, we have a generation of kids who are incredibly anxious. I mean, Peter Gray, our friend Peter Gray, writes about this a lot, that we are seeing rates of anxiety and depression in preschool age children unlike we've ever seen before. And we've been testing this for 75 years using essentially the same test. So we know something significant is changing. And I think a lot of it has to do with our expectations of children. We've kind of robbed them of that authentic childhood, which I love coming back to your term, because that's where I learned it from. And it's to me, we find ourselves with all of schooling. I mean, traditional schooling, or standard schooling, which is the term I try to use, is all about not making mistakes, right? What's the worst thing you can do? Get the answer wrong. Yeah, fail the test. Fail a grade. Oh, heaven forbid you fail a grade. I mean, all of these things, failure is right there. It's always the risk. They're always putting that artificial risk there when, we all know, right? If I am trying to say my ABCs and I keep skipping the letter D, you're not going to punish me for that. You're just going to keep reminding me, oh yeah, D, don't forget the D. Right. And that's for so often what we do is we feel like, oh, no, we have to really make it harsh. We have to make them feel wrong and stupid for it.
because we go back again to if there's no punishment or discipline,
Right.
you know, oh, Tom, I love talking to you. And I love this conversation that we're getting started here. I know DEY this year at the Summer Institute, we're going to be talking about what works, right? What we want to bring to the table people who work with young children, people who have researched young children, but people who really do this work and talk about what's working.
Yeah.
What are the fixes? Where can we go from here? Because policymakers and corporations are not going to have the answers. And
Well,
and
'cause
when
they rely on data, right? They're always
Mhm.
looking for test scores, and success is averages and things like that go up instead of the individual kids getting to explore the world, according to really the way our brains are designed to learn, which is through curiosity, which is through, hey, there's something unique and different I want to know about.
Exactly. Well, I know that you've been really busy. Tell us what you're doing now and how everyone can contact you in order to be a part of that.
Okay. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is consulting with individual schools. So if you have a school out there and you want to get some professional development along the lines of play-based learning, about working with parents, about the way things like how we can speak with children so that they so that they're thinking for themselves rather than just reacting to adults. We've got a series of courses that are available online, or I can deliver them in person, and so that's what I've been doing. If you want to find out about my courses, I'll just it's courses.teachertomsworld.com. And that's where people can find out. If they want to come and check out the blog, it's just Google Teacher Tom, and I guarantee I'll be the first one on the list.
Yep.
Not many people have been writing as often as I do, and Google rewards quantity, if nothing else. So
And you have two books.
I have two books, Teacher Tom's
Mhm.
first book and Teacher Tom's second book, and you can find links to that at teachertomsworld.com as well. And you can also
Alright.
find that on the blog. There's a link to buy the books at the bottom of each post. And I'm working on, Keisha.
I was going to say it.
I'm working on my third book, and this third book is actually, I'm sure people have asked you this a lot too. People have often said to me, okay, so smarty pants, but you have this great critique of the way the world is. And this conversation has been a critique of the way the way education's going. And they say, okay, so if you were in charge, what would you do? And so that's the book I'm putting together right now that I'm hoping will be finished by the end of the year. And I've been contemplating this for some time now, and I've written bits and pieces on the blog. So probably if you're a regular reader on the blog, you kind of have a gist of the direction I'll be going with this. But I do. And so this is one, I'm writing it as if I really was in charge, and I had in charge of the money, and I had in charge of everything. How would I organize it? And so it's like a Nirvana piece I'm writing. But that's okay, because then I want other people to engage with it and then start saying, hey, this piece I like, this piece doesn't work. Let's weave this in there. And I'm trying to, take models from around the world to really take a look at them. I'm inspired right now by the way they do early childhood in New Zealand, for example. I think they're doing an incredible job in early childhood down there, truly bicultural curriculum that they have.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm hopeful that everyone does read that book and this conversation starts to happen. And before we leave, I want to say, Teacher Tom, for President 2024, let's start a revolution.
Don't curse me.
I knew that would get you. Thank you so much, Tom.
I have to work on education and things with kids. I can't do the international stuff.
Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait to keep reading your work, keep learning from you, keep taking your classes, and keep fighting the fight. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
And that was another episode of the Defending the Early Years podcast. Defending the Early Years works to support the rights and needs of young children nationally. Learn more at DEY.org. Pay us a visit, sign up for our newsletter, or connect with us on social media. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.